what. So it relates to the brainwave activity that we're observing at that particular moment. Okay. Now again, takes time. All right. So don't get in a rush to know things, because this is lifelong learning field. Okay. So inattention, it's observed in ADD, ADHD. Drowsiness, so those people who fall asleep in class, in a meeting, driving. So it could be related to sleep disorders as well. Daydreaming, so is the client that you're talking to and they're looking in the distance and they're on a spot and you're talking to them and you're going, hey, Johnny, I'm talking to you. You have to bring them back to reality. And being easily distracted. So it's part of the inattentive type of ADD. Now, it's also seen in focus and introspection during meditation. So there's a certain theta pattern that can be enhanced with meditation, which is good. It's more for global thinking, and it's got two sides to the story. So the 4 to 5 is the slower side, and the 6 to 7 is probably the better side of things. Now, depends on what you're looking at the EEG. So again, these are some generalities. It's not the whole picture. So it depends on where it's localized and what sources. Depends where in the brain we're seeing it. All right? It usually depends on where in the brain we're seeing it. So it can be related on the good side to creativity, spontaneity, memory formation, the hippocampus, and the ability to remember. So theta is good for memory consolidation. We have some long-term potentiation. If we can get the neurons to fire just a little extra longer, we can get some memory formation. Okay? And that's usually the mechanism behind that. Now, on the negative side, it's associated to inattention, daydreaming, depression, and anxiety. So even though it's hypoarousal, it can be related to anxiety and or depression. So as you can start seeing, most brainwaves are involved in most conditions, one way or the other. So the important thing is where in the brain and what the activity looks like. We look at the theta beta ratio. If it is more than 3 to 1, it's indicative of ADHD. Right? Now, I want to say something important. Whenever I do a qEEG and I'm doing the interpretation for the client, or if I'm doing an interpretation in a lecture such as this one, I never ever diagnose the person with labels. So I will never tell the person, you have ADHD, you have depression, you have anxiety. Okay? Why? Because these are tendencies that can be changed, that can be improved, that can be optimized. If I told the client you're ADHD and that makes them better, well then I don't need to do any neurofeedback. I don't need to provide medication. I don't need to do any type of intervention. You have ADHD. Oh, I'm cured. I can go home. Okay? If it were that simple, right? And the other thing is, it can sometimes confirm what the parents were thinking. So parents come in with their child, and I go, yeah, your child's ADHD. And they both go, we knew it. We knew our child was stupid and different. Because sometimes they say that. And the kid's there in front of them, and he's hearing that. And this little child is going, oh, I'm ADHD, I'm stupid. Yeah, I'm ADHD, I'm stupid. Because the kids will label themselves. Or even a teenager, or even an adult ADHD. So I say, you have the tendency to lose your focus. There's a tendency for you to daydream. There's a tendency for you to forget things. So I talk about tendencies. Because with neurofeedback, we can change them. We can make it better. So that's the thing. But if we have a 3 to 1 ratio, meaning three times more theta than beta, then it is ADHD. You just don't say it. I mean, you know it, but you just don't want to say it. And that's my recommendation. Now, 3 to 1 is also a slow brainwave disorders. So there's a slow reaction time, there's poor calculation, there's poor impulse control. So all those things that go with learning disabilities and behavioral disabilities. Behavioral issues related to excess low brainwave activity. And increased amplitudes correspond with hypoperfusion. So the brain is not getting as much blood and oxygen as we want it to. So when you look at the topography and the delta is all red, all of that red all over the place, the brain is not getting enough blood and enough oxygen. So it's not functioning optimally. Brain needs three basic things to function. I mean, the neurons and the brain need three basic things to function: glucose, oxygen, and stimulation. Right? So the glucose we get from our food and from the glucose in our system and the metabolization. Oxygen that we get from breathing and exercising, and stimulation. So stimulation is anything that stimulates the brain. Learning a language. Right? So for instance, I'm speaking in English and you're listening to me and you're trying to understand what I'm saying, and you're very attentive, your brain is being stimulated. Okay? And I'm talking to you and my brain's being stimulated by the fact that I want you to get this and understand what you're saying and learn something. Okay? So learning a language, exercising, playing an instrument, traveling to another country, all of those things are stimulation, and they always have to be implemented alongside neurofeedback. So don't expect that the client is going to come to your office for 40 sessions and they're going to sit there and do neurofeedback, and just by the mere fact of doing neurofeedback, they're going to get better. Neurofeedback is going to help, yes, but the child needs to exercise, or the client, at any age, needs to exercise. They need to eat better. They need stimulation. So they need to read a book. They need to go outdoors. They need to make new friends, learn a new language. Okay? All those things are very, very important. Because if we don't stimulate the brain, we don't get it to work. So we inhibit it for symptom remediation, whether it is inattentiveness, fogginess, fatigue, whatever it is, we want to inhibit and downtrain it. We use it for addictions, the alpha theta protocols, peak performance, and PTSD. Generally, we don't want to uptrain it frontally, so if you have client with frontal theta, be very wary, very aware of that, because you don't want to uptrain that. You want to make more theta at the front of the theta. Then you're going to create more hypoperfusion, and then the problems are going to get worse. So yes, we can get a client to feel worse with neurofeedback if we don't know what. So it's very important you know what you're looking at, because otherwise you're gonna create trouble. Where it's predominant in our anterior cortex, anterior cingulate cortex. It's generated by the limbic system, which is relevant for a few things we're going to see later on, and the thalamus. So it's part of the cortico-thalamic loop. And depending on the location, it could be a slow alpha, and we're going to see what that means. So, this is where things start getting complicated, and I can see by some of your faces. Slow alpha, delta, theta, don't worry. So we'll take a look at that first. So, some studies that have been done to identify certain types of algorithms, and you can do it with go, no-go tasks. So look at the ERPs and different types of things. And interestingly, Kropotov, if you can get Yuri Kropotov's book, Yuri Kropotov is the neuroscientist and is the designer of the Mitsar amplifiers in Russia. He has a new book, and he mentions the theta activity being more prominent in Asians at the vertex. So for you guys, as compared to Europeans or Western nations, you produce more theta here. It's more prominent, okay? And why is that? Because you make more emphasis in math. And that's a byproduct of math learning. So it's an ERP that responds to go, no-go, and arithmetic and numeric tasks. And because in Asia, the emphasis is put on math more so than other countries, we see some brain differences in their function. So that's quite interesting. So it's associated with the activation of metabolic activity in ACC. So again, the limbic system is highly involved in theta. So it's highly involved in anxiety, depression, and trauma. The midline that we see is activity from the hippocampus by those pyramidal neurons. And they can change between 4 and 10 hertz. So even though the traditional conventional range is 4 to 8, in the EEG you will see sometimes 10 hertz alpha, type alpha. Okay? And we'll see what that looks like. So it's done by long-term potentiation. And long-term potentiation means we get the neuron to fire a little longer. So we get the synapse to take a little longer for the memory to be consolidated. And neurofeedback is one of those ways by which we can achieve long-term potentiation. Because we are training with operant conditioning, meaning if your brain takes more than half a second to sustain the alpha, then we get a feedback, we get a reward. So by increasing the time, we're asking the neuron to just hold it for a little longer, and then it goes back to the resting potential. And then we push it, and then we go back to the resting potential. So it's that pushing back and forth that gives us the LTP, that gives us the memory consolidation. And you can see on the EEG when a person's brain is not consolidating that very well, you can see that the activity starts to desynchronise, so the channel looks flat. So there's not a lot of firing going on in the neurons in those networks. And you can tell that something going on there. So the neurons are not communicating and they're not sending the message where it needs to be sent. Okay. So working memory, issues with theta, memory codification, especially episodic memory, remembering episodes and events. So this is the type of person, traumatized patients, PTSD patients will have a lot of episodic memory issues where they dissociate and they don't remember what happened 5 seconds ago. So they say, oh, I want to tell you something, and they get interrupted. And then 5 seconds later, you tell them, what were you going to tell me? And they go, I forgot. I don't remember. So they literally forget within seconds. And you can see a lot of theta activity in that, sometimes T-funk. So the midline theta, which is abnormal, so you see a lot of theta in your CZ, FZ cortex, is one of the ADHD subtypes. So traditionally in psychology, you go with DSM-4 or DSM-5, right? DSM-4 to DSM-5, which lists a cluster of symptoms, and the person has to meet some of those symptoms to be diagnosed with something. Okay. Now, that it gives you a general idea, and that's classifying everybody within the same category. But when you look at the brain and you look at different ADHD types, then we have subtypes or phenotypes. So it's genetic variations of the same diagnosis, which manifest as different things in different parts of the brain. Okay, and when we look at the EEGs, I'll show you. So one of the subtypes is the theta rhythm. So if you look at the EEG and you see the theta rhythm, and you look at FZ and CZ, that's one of the subtypes. But you can have frontal alpha or occipital alpha ADD. You can have mu rhythm ADD. You can have epileptiform activity type ADD. So it's really important to look at the brain. Do not go by the mere diagnosis of a book. Look at the neuronal substrates. It's very important that we look at the brain. So Kropotov, if you can get his book, and he says when the theta presentation in sites different to FZ and PZ should be considered abnormal. So you have theta anywhere else other than FZ and PZ, you need a database comparison. And you can use NeuroGuide or the HBI database. You know, there's a NeuroGuide is the most popular one in the market. created by Robert Thatcher in the United States. And a lot of, do you guys use it here, Dr. Lin? Neuroguide? Okay. Purchase it, yeah. It's a very, very thorough, very well designed database. It's one of the most popular in the market. I don't use it, but a lot of my colleagues do, and they really, really like it. And for research purposes, it's very useful. So this is what theta would look like. And again, so how do we know what the rhythm is? We count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See? 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 4, 5, and 6 cycles, 6 hertz. Now, keep in mind, this is filtered, but it gives you an idea of the morphology, and it gives you an idea of the range. So you can count the number of cycles on each second, and it gives you an idea of what rhythmicity is presenting at that particular point in time. So this is just to give you a visual idea of what it looks like. And then when you embed them together in the EEG, you will train your eyes to be able to identify them without filtering them. It just takes a lot of repetition. You know, one time I went to my mentor Jay Gonkuman 5 years ago, and I said, "Yay, Jay, what's the best way to learn how to read the EEG?" And he says, "Well, you have to sit down and take EEG after EEG after EEG after EEG, and then you read it and you read it and you read it and you read it." So 5 years later, I'm doing that. Jay hasn't been looking at EEGs for 40 years or something. I mean, he's looked at more than 500,000 EEGs. So it takes time to train the eye. When you first look at this, you go, that's impossible. And the more you do it, the better you become. Okay, so it's just a matter of training it. Now we have alpha, which is 8 to 12. So again, if you take the BCIA exam, 8 to 12 is the answer. Do not answer anything other than 8 to 12 because you're going to fail that exam, that question. And it's related to relaxed focus. So the brain is in an idle state. It's neutral. There's no metabolic processing. The brain is resting. It's sitting down, taking the sun, drinking a piña colada, waiting to take action. All right? So that's what alpha means, usually. So if you want to train visualization skills for athletes, anybody here interested in working with sports? Nobody? Okay. If you are ever interested in alpha, the alpha rhythm is a very popular rhythm. It's related to emotional trauma, to artistic skills, and visual memory. So for athletes to tell them how to visualize, or even for artistic type clients, if you want to help them visualize, normally you're training the alpha rhythm. Now it's also related to inattention. So you have another subtype of ADD, which is the slow alpha inattentive. It's related to insomnia. It's related to people who talk too much. It's related to meditation, and like I said, an idle state where the brain is ready to respond. It's resting. There's no metabolic uptake or consumption or usage. The brain is just there ready to respond. So it's in a car with a gear shift, it's the neutral. And the brain is ready to shift into gear and go into action. So the neutral, you're standing there and you're waiting for the order, that's what alpha means for the brain, in general terms. So training the alpha can train the brain to be more rested and more ready for action if needed. So you can achieve, one of the things you can achieve is physical relaxation. Okay, so really useful for physical relaxation. So in athletes, when they have long competitions and long practice sessions, we sometimes train the alpha rhythm to help them relax physically and be rested and be recovered and ready for the next thing. If it is 9 to 13, you're awake and relaxed, again, in general. But you can also have fast alpha and be anxious, because that's one of the subtypes of anxiety. Alpha over 10 hertz, and then synchronous alpha over 10 hertz is going to be a lot of anxiety. Okay, so this is your anxiety type or depression. It means meditation and inner peace, awake and relax, is related to daydreaming. So if you have below 10 hertz, alpha below 10 hertz, daydreaming, it could be depression, either above or below. It's related to OCD, ADHD, anxiety, it could be a sign of a TBI. Now, I didn't put that here, but slow alpha below 10 hertz, it could mean that the person is using drugs, especially marijuana. So some marijuana users, you can confront them. You look at the EEG, and you suspect that they're smoking it, and you go, I see all that marijuana you're smoking, it's making you feel stupid. And they open their eyes and go, how do you know I'm smoking marijuana? And please don't tell my parents and this and that. So you can gauge it. You have to ask, you can suspect it, but it's a good indication. So again, it's hypoperfusion if it is lower than 10 hertz. And it's the optimization, again. So the brain is an idle state, it's resting. Okay, so it's good for the brain. We need alpha for the brain because we need it to rest. We cannot go on and on and on all the time. At some point we need to be rested and ready to respond. Again, sensitive to glucose metabolization, so sugar diets will help it. Especially if it is low frequency, high amplitude. So low frequency, high amplitude means it's low alpha. 8 to 10, 8 to 9 hertz. Yeah. You will say in the EEG is really high synchronous. So it will really, really ruin your day. So we have trained to relieve symptoms of what? Depression, and we down train for anxiety. But if we want to achieve more relaxation in general, we up train the alpha. If we want the person to sleep better, we want to up train the alpha. Again, depends on where in the brain it is presenting itself, all right? Where is it predominant? In the parietal and occipital regions. And that brings me to an important point. When you're looking at the EEG, you want to focus your attention in part at PZ. Okay? So your parietal midline, because that's called the alpha background rhythm. All right? So that's your baseline rhythm, which is an indicator of self-regulation. Now, alpha with the eyes closed is going to be greater than the alpha with the eyes open. When you close your eyes, alpha gets bigger back here. When you open your eyes, it's supposed to suppress. So if the person opens their eyes and the alpha is still big, we have a problem. All right? And we want a basic background alpha rhythm back here to achieve self-regulation. So if you're looking at the eyes open EEG and the person doesn't have a lot of alpha on, at PZ, it means they're not being able to self-regulate. Which means you tell that person, I want you to stress out. And they go, no problem. But if you tell them to relax, they go, oh, wait a second, what is that? How do you do that? Okay? So it's the person who has learned to stress out, has learned to be anxious, but they cannot relax. Even if their lives depend on it. So, very important. Now, the other important one is the peak alpha frequency. Okay, the PAF, or peak alpha frequency, which is an indicator of brain processing speed, and is an indicator of intelligence. So that's measured with the eyes open, eyes open resting. So when you look at the peak alpha frequency, you look at the spectral analysis, and you want to see where the alpha, where the highest peak of alpha is, how many hertz. Okay? So for people who are 0 to 10 years old, below 10 hertz is okay. So if you have a child with 8 hertz alpha at PZ, that's fine. Now, from people who are 10 years of age and older, which means all of us in this room, ideally more than 10 or more. Okay, so for people who are 10 years of age older, 10 or more. So if you have a client who's 22, 23, 45, 86, and their alpha is at 7, you have a serious compromise. All right? So you have, normally when I see people who are above 10 years of age, and I look at the peak alpha frequency and it is 8, 9, 7, the first thing I do is a CI, an IQ test, sorry. So IQ assessment. Now the peak alpha frequency is not going to tell you what the child's or the person's IQ is. You need to test it, but it's a good predictor of that. And it's called a brain brightening protocol or brain boosting protocol. So you can train C4 and PZ. If you want to increase IQ, if you want to help with intelligence, if you want to train learning disabilities, C4 to PZ. That's your intelligence and your IQ up. And normally, what do you train? Well, if the alpha is slow, you down train the alpha. If the delta is slow, you down train the delta. If the theta is slow, you down train the theta. And normally, what you want to reward is 12 to 15. So you normally, inhibit anything that's too high, whatever you see on the EEG, and then you reward 12 to 15. And that really helps you. And there's some literature that talks about IQ points being increased with neurofeedback. So it's somewhere between 4 or 10 points, which is very significant. So you can increase IQ in a person with neurofeedback. So when we want to look at the alpha background rhythm, and same thing. If the person closes their eyes and the alpha suppresses, if the alpha doesn't increase sporadically and occipitally, there's a problem. It could mean trauma. It could mean a sleep disorder. It more than likely it is going to be anxiety. So we need to look at that. So as during the thalamus and the cortex, the difference are related to age. As we age, our alpha peak frequency starts declining. As we get older, the peak alpha frequency starts declining. So when we're young, we make alpha, and by the time we're 30, 35, we start getting a reduction. Okay? The normal attrition rate, for the peak alpha frequency is 0.5 hertz per decade. So to lose 0.5 hertz per decade is within the normal range. If you're losing more than 0.5 hertz per decade, you have a problem. And you have to look at dementia. You have to look at some kind of neural degeneration disorder. You have to look at different things. It could be. I remember I had a lady last year she's 50 years old, so she's a young woman, and her peak alpha frequency was like 8 hertz or 7 something, very, very slow. And so when I sent her to the functional medicine doctor and they did all the testing, it turns out she had lead poisoning. She had a lot of lead and aluminum in her blood, and that was causing the brain to degenerate. Now, one of the things that the functional medicine doctor told me is, if we had not detected it on time and she had gone on for another 5 years, she could have probably developed Parkinson's or something. So it's very important to look at different things. So in a person, if you see a low peak alpha frequency below what you want to see it, test for everything that you can think of. All right? And an IQ test is a good idea as well. So there's 3 types: the posterior alpha, the mu rhythm, which we will talk about more later, and the medial and temporal, which is only detectable in magnetoelectric magnetoencephalography. So that's not something that's good. So if we want to cut down flashbacks in PTSD, we suppress it. So a lot of people who are traumatized will not make alpha with the eyes closed because they don't want to go into a flashback. They don't want to remember. Because alpha with the eyes closed it helps you visualize better. Okay? And then again, the peak alpha frequency changes with age. So that's what alpha would look like in the brain. And again, if we count percent, 1 second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we got an 8 hertz alpha rhythm here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? And if you see the peaks, for instance, if you see the amplitude here, it's larger in the back. So we have slower alpha. Do you see that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 6 hertz rhythm in the background. See that? So the higher the amplitude, the slower the frequency.